get to know him. He's been a real calming influence on me, and he's really a gentle, kind man. And with that, I'll give you Joe from Little Rock, Arkansas.
My name is Joe, and I'm a real alcoholic. Through God's grace, because this program works one day at a time in my life, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink since the 10th day of March, 1962. It has been good to be here this weekend. This has been a very special trip for me. I think about all the wonderful opportunities I've had in Alcoholics Anonymous, being many places, all over the country, really all over the world in AA. Very strangely, I thought about it. This is my first time at the Kentucky conference, and this is home for me. I was born in Louisville. I was reminiscing, I guess, the other night, and I opened the blinds and looked out the window over the river, down on the wharf, as we used to call it. Of course, they have modernized it and changed it a lot. But I remember as a child, I guess I was about 7 years old, and it's funny how we recall these things. My father, a lot of times on a hot summer night, when it'd be hot, and I was born about 20 blocks from here where we stand. He would put us in the car, and he had an old 28-mile Studebaker. I remember it was maroon. It had big wooden yellow wheels on it. And he would drive us down to the wharf, and it was all cobblestone at that time, just a cobblestone wharf. They had put the freeway out there. And we would be able to get out of the car, sit on the running board, and maybe a popsicle. They say we tell a little bit a lot about what it was like and what happened and what it's like today. I love to talk about these three facets of my life. I think it's very important to discuss what we were like so we can identify with each other. And I think it's important that we talk a little bit about what it's like now. And I think maybe the most important segment of these things is what happened in our lives, the miracle of our recovery. I was watching the crowd around, and there were some people over in the center, and they tell me they were school teachers. I don't know how we have these conferences. They mix us with a lot of strange people sometimes. But we were I was down in Florida, and there were about 5,000 people at this conference, and it was on a big complex. And there were some other things going on at the same time. I think it was some senior citizens there. There's a lot of senior citizens in Florida, and they were having something. And there were buses that carry you from one center to another. It was a complex rather than a hotel. And we were riding the buses, and there was a couple of the senior citizens on the bus, and they were talking, and we overheard them. One of them said, what are all these people with these yellow badges? You know, the AAs had on yellow badges. And one of the ladies said, I don't know, but I heard they were from Alcoholics Anonymous. And the other one said, what is Alcoholics Anonymous? She said, I don't know. She said, but I went by this big center over there, and I heard them in their meetings. And she said, what did they do? She said, one of them got up and told sad stories. And said all the rest of them laughed. So I guess that's what it's all about. Really, I don't know why I'm an alcoholic, but then again, I know maybe today why I am an alcoholic. Okay? I think I really, in the later years of my life, can see why I became an alcoholic. I can see why I recovered. Okay? Because I did those things to be able to do the things that I do now. It was God. It's my purpose in life. I didn't set out to. I remember growing up here, and I didn't become an alcoholic because of my child. I had a wonderful childhood. We were poor people where we lived. In fact, everybody was poor in those days. Right? But it was strange then. We didn't know we were poor. See, they didn't draw the poverty line until many years later. We were all behind it. See, it didn't have any TV, right? So we didn't know what everybody else had. We thought we were doing all right. But I told them we were so poor. I know we was poor. I had plenty to eat because every time I ate, my mother said I had a plenty. But it really was, I'm not an alcoholic because of my childhood. I'm not searching for that. I hear all these we tell all these stories about why we were alcoholics, and the only thing that we have in common is alcohol. Okay? That's why we're alcoholics. I remember growing up here and my experiences of growing up, and I went to high school here and went to college for a couple of years. I didn't know, and I was about 18 years old, I was introduced to alcohol. I remember the place of that first drink. It was a little dance hall where we had dances down off of 8th and Street, downtown. And I remember, it was many years later when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous that I really found out what really happened that night. And Dr. Silkworth, in the big book, is about the only thing that had ever explained to me what took place in my life. Because he said, I found a sense and ease and comfort that came at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks that I saw other people experience with immunity. I remember that night. I remember that's what those first few drinks did to me. It brought me that sense, and he said, I remember that, and did I remember that? And that was repeated over and over in my life. Some people, it takes a little while to become an alcoholic, and some of us rare people become alcoholic right away. I hear people up behind these podiums talking about, now I can't give you that this morning, about all the things I lost through drinking. I didn't lose anything through drinking. I didn't get anything. I never got a chance to get anything to lose. I was right out to shoot, and I didn't know I was an alcoholic. And that's the trouble with this disease. The only alcoholics that know they're alcoholics are the one in recovery. That's strange, isn't it? And when you're an alcoholic and don't know you're an alcoholic, you have a lot of problems. See, when you're an alcoholic and don't know you're an alcoholic, you try to do what non-alcoholic people do, like get married. And get a job. And alcoholics can't do those things. We have problems with those things, and I had problems immediately. I remember I got married to a young lady. I remember, I had all the dreams of everybody. And I remember, we began to have problems directly related to my drinking. And, the whole thing, at first, it lasted 5 years. The whole thing was a mess. I had 2 kids. As a result of this marriage, we were divorced. At that time, I had moved to Indiana. I had moved to Indianapolis, and I was working in the post office there. and I was 21 or 22 by this time, and my drinking was maybe chronic. It was over when I left here, and for me, I was about 27, 28 years old. It was a disaster. So I always had problems from the very beginning. After that divorce in Indianapolis, I came back to Louisville. My father lived here, God bless him. He was in my life, and he influenced my life so much. He was just a sweet little man, hard-working, never had nothing. But he always tried. And I remember I would always, when that was over, I came back to Louisville. In fact, this was my home base for quite a few years. After that, I would get a job and work a little while and lose it. But I would always come back to Louisville. I'd always come back to my father. He was a sharp-blooded guy. He would never lend me no money until I wanted to leave town. And I'd leave and go away for a while and get drunk and mess up and come back to Louisville. And I would say, this old town ain't doing me no good. I can't do no good here. He said, how much you want to borrow? So I was leaving and coming back, and one time I was off and I was down in Alabama and things fell apart for me again. I guess I had a spark of decency. I couldn't come back and subject myself. I just didn't feel coming back here. So I thought about my sister I had in Little Rock. My sister, we had grown up here, and my sister had left going to college down there. She met a young man while she was in school, fine young man, and they got married, and she kept on going to college, and took about 6 years in between these kids, and she was teaching school down there, and they were just a struggling young couple. And I thought about it. I said, you know how people say we don't be interested in our families, but alcoholics have a lot of interest in their families when they get in trouble. We love our families. We need those people. And I thought about this, and I said, you ought to go see your sister. That's not right, treating her. You haven't seen her in I was hunting for somewhere to go. So I went to Little Rock. I think about that in my life. I went to Little Rock and left Louisville here in 1958, and I went to Little Rock. Now, you'd have to remember Little Rock in 1958. Okay? The school crisis, the integration crisis was down there in 57. Everybody else was leaving Little Rock. And I was going. You know how drunks are. They said the only people making any money was the moving trucks. And I remember arriving in Little Rock, and things were, I could always get a job, right? Alcoholic, I did about anything. You ask the alcoholic, what do you do for a living? About anything. He's telling the truth. It takes that to make a town last. You have to do almost anything. So I got a job and went to work, and I was there with my sister. She had these two small kids, and they were, you'd have to know my sister. She's still the same way. We were raised in a little United Methodist church right up here on Brackenridge Street at Jackson Street. We were involved in that since the day we were born. My father was on the board of trustees of that church when he was 18 years old. And he was on there when he died at 85. So we were immersed in that church and grew up in that church and raised the right way. And about the only one who took her on was my sister. She was a very religious person. She was involved, had a beautiful voice, and she could play the church organ in the choir. She still does. And she was the choir director at this little church. And my brother-in-law, her husband, was the lay speaker of the church. Great people. And it's bad when a drunk gets tied up with those kind of people. You know, I mean, it's very inconvenient to be around and be in a house with them kind of people. You know, you're trying to lay in on Sunday morning, and they shining shoes, cooking bacon. That's horrible, right? And you got to act out what you are. And they would suggest church, right? And of course, I avoided it as much as I could. And then one morning, Sunday morning, I thought I was threatened by them repeating this over and over. I thought I might better go to church. So one Sunday morning, I went to church with them. And it was a great point in my life because God works through people. God put Lou Bell in my life, my alumni, my wife today. Great person. I wouldn't be here today without her. She played a key role in me taking a look at me. You know, and Lou Bell was a member of the choir. She was a great friend of my sister's. And you know how, I don't know if you understand, the choir director and the choir members are pretty close people. You know, they talk and spend a lot of time together, and they get real close. So I knew how the situation was that morning. We always talk about it. Of course, she talks about it different than I do, right? You know how them Al-9s are. They have a different picture. They make up stuff, right? and change it around a little bit. And that brings to mind a story I love to tell. One of my favorites here lately is about, you know, changing it around about, it said the Pope came over from New York City, and he was doing these tours and doing everything, going different places, blessing different things, putting on all things around the city. And one day he came down from the hotel, and his limousine was out there, big white, beautiful limousine, smoke windows in it, and chauffeur. And he was standing out there talking to the chauffeur, and he said, it was early, so he was just visiting with him. He was telling him, this is a wonderful car, and you have a wonderful job driving it. And he said, I get to ride it. And he said, but, you know, you don't know how wonderful it is. You get to do the common things like drive. He said, I don't get to drive anymore. I never get that experience. I'm always taken care of. And sometimes I wonder how it would be to be able to drive. And the chauffeur said, we can take care of that this morning. So what can we do? He said, you can put on the chauffeur cap, you can drive, and I'll get in the back, right? So won't nobody never know the difference. So sure enough, the Pope got in the front, and the chauffeur got in the back, and they just took off driving down the street. And he hadn't drove for a long time, and he didn't know the sensation of the car. He was speeding a little bit, and he passed the intersection, and two police in a police car said, look, that limousine speeding, stop it. So the two cops took off and pulled the limousine over, and one of the cops got out and went to the front door and rolled the window down, and the Pope rolled the window down, and the cop looked in there, and he said, go ahead on. And they rolled the window up and let him go, and the limousine went on down the street. Policeman got in the car, and the other cop said, did you give him a ticket? He said, no. He said, why? He was speeding. He said, man, you know who was driving that car? He said, who? He said, the Pope was driving that car. And he said, if the Pope is driving the limousine, you know who's in the back seat. So, you know, when I made it to that church door, we walked to the church door. I know how Lou Bell feels. You know, looking from her viewpoint, this nice-looking young man coming in with the organist and the lay speaker of the church. I had a good front. And you know how we alcoholics make our living by selling fast conversation, these slow-thinking ladies. You know, we good at it. I did my best job that morning. Oh, man. And we met, and we were married in about 3 months, right? It was a superb job, really. Now, Lou Bell owned her own home, little home. We still live in the same little modest home where she owned this little home from a previous marriage, and she had a good job for a working lady. She owned her own home, and she drove a nice new automobile, right? And I thoroughly convinced her how she needed me to take care of her. Now, I had just got there, and I came there with $4 in my pocket. A little raggedy suitcase, wasn't too crowded, right? And I always talk back, because I remember that they still travel the same way. Drunks travel, drunks don't change. I had a necktie tied, in a drunk suitcase, you have to tie a necktie around one end of them. They don't lock. Every day I watch them come in and I run the treatment center, and they come in the same way. Nowadays they got them black garbage bags. We didn't have those in those. We had a guy come in, and people know I'm interested in these things. All the guys around the treatment center know I'm an expert on this. And they see the guy come in one day, they say, "Joe, come down here and look at this guy. Look at him. He can't get sober. He's got alligator luggage." I said, "Well, man, you can't get sober with alligator luggage." So we really, right after I got married, we'll celebrate. We got to get married, you got to celebrate. So I took a week off from work. It was during Christmas time, stocked in a good supply of liquor, and went to drinking, right? Celebrating. And we wasn't married 2 weeks, and I drank my way into the nut house. That's a hell of a thing, Both of us couldn't take the honeymoon. I had to do it myself, And I remember that trip. We didn't have detox centers then. Thank God we didn't, maybe. I was kind of drunk, and you could have detoxed me to death, you know what I mean? But back then, they were in the 60s, it was still available, it was still there. It was the old state hospital, the old state sign up there. Insane asylum. It was built right after the Civil War, medieval type place. And it wasn't any resentment. No one mentioned anything. It wasn't any AA. Nobody mentioned alcoholism. They just put in there and they give us some of that Thorazine, and we all went around with the Thorazine shuffle and slobbered a little bit. In about 10 days, they let us go. And I didn't know maybe I was searching because, what was going wrong in my life. I think we all search in our alcoholism. What is the problem? What is going on in our lives? I remember leaving there and continued to drink, and one of the great points in my life, God used another person in my life during this period of time. The next couple of years was a little wino in a bar in Kansas City. I was still a traveling drunk. I would leave my wife, leave Lou Bell, and go off and stay 2 or 3 months, and that was my pattern. And I was in Kansas City, and I was working, and I was getting drunk, and my life was going to hell. And I'd go in this bar every morning at 6 o'clock, and this morning, and I went in there, and usually it wouldn't be, mostly be winos would be in there. And I lowered myself one morning to go down and be associated with these people. And a little wino named Van, and God uses very small, insignificant people in my life. It wasn't a high and almighty. It was the plain and the common people. And I was drinking them, and they were trying to get a pint of wine, and wine pint was 60 cents. And they would buy the bottles and pour it up in glasses. They wouldn't give them the bottles. I don't know why. And I remember this morning as they poured, this girl, her name was Lucille, she'd pour the wine up, and you'd order it like give us a pint on 3, and they would pour it up in 3 glasses. And when she poured it, it would be level. I mean, she was really good at pouring this wine. She wouldn't repeat. She'd just go right down the line, and it'd all be level. But nothing is perfect with we alcoholics. All the winos would get down and check and see if they were level, And I didn't know. I was standing there, and they was all, sometimes they would vote or hold a meeting on it, right? But finally they decided one glass that did have a hair more than the other. And they would give that to the man who bought. So I was buying that morning. They didn't have no money, and I had about $3 or $4. And we began to talk. You know how that magic chemical, that first drink in the morning, that's a magic chemical. Nothing like it. And you have that great feeling, and it's conversation time. And we was just talking. And Dan said, Joe, you know you're a pretty nice guy. I said, yeah, I know that. I really knew that. And he says, you're not like us. And you're different from some of these other guys down here on the street. I knew I wasn't like him. He said, but Joe, you ain't got but one problem. I said, what's that, Van? He said, Joe, you drink too much. Huh? You know, thank God for Van, wherever he is. But wherever that man was, and I never saw him, but remember coming in contact with him. But, you know, he sowed a seed. You know, and he had a problem. This is why I listened to him. He was standing in the middle of one of the biggest problems I ever seen. Other people didn't have it. They talked to me. I remember I began to think about, well, maybe I do have a problem. You know, I do have a problem with drinking. And you know, we alcoholics, we got great minds. After all, we're intelligent people, right? And about 3 or 4 days I left Kansas City and came back to Little Rock, began to eat on me. I have a problem with drinking. And, you know, that was not my problem, but it's the way it appeared, right? I thought my problem was drinking. So therefore, if my problem is drinking, all you got to do is quit drinking, right? But my problem was deeper than that. See, my problem was never drinking. My problem was never to quit drinking. I used to think all the time my problem was how to quit drinking. Quitting was not my problem. I quit 3 or 4 times a day. That proved I could quit, right? Starting was my problem. I could quit, but I couldn't stop starting. So I came home to quit drinking, and I quit drinking for 8 or 9 months, and things went pretty good for me. They were better, let's say, outwardly, like work, finance, and those things. Those were better. Finally, the day finally came, and the only explanation I ever found for my life is in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God for the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God it's on the face of this earth. I just discovered a few months ago, I remember growing up here when I was about 7 years old, my mother died when I was 7 years old. It was a great loss in my life. It was a great loss to me as a 7-year-old child. But it just dawned on me a few months ago that the same month my mother died, A.A. was born. So thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous. It's on the face of this earth in my lifetime. You know, so, you know, I took a drink. This book explained to me, when I looked at this book, it was the only thing that explained to me why I took that, why this happened. It talked about I would become restless, irritable, and discontented, and I would take this drink. And it says, you know, no human power could relieve me of that. I was powerless over alcohol. I had no choice. And I took a drink that morning after being sober for 9 months, and I went through the well-known spree, and I ended up on a bar on March the 10th, 1962. Like a lot of other mornings I had been through, and I reached that magic point. I reached that point that God seems to give some alcoholics, a great gift, right? Bill talked about it in the big book when he said no words could tell the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity, quicksand stretched out all around me. I had met my match. Alcohol was my master. You know, I remember coming to that point that morning on the bar, and in this window of despair, I remember the depth of it, and it was total defeat. And I decided then, I began to get, it wasn't a real lot of reality, but I had some strange things begin to happen. I got off of that bar, and I started hunting for a solution. You know, step one, and it says when we see that, that gives us the willingness. Step one is the willingness. You know, I was talking about it earlier this morning. You know, we like to, in our big book study, we like to look up the words and find the real true meaning in depth of those words and see what Bill was really saying when he said willingness is the key. And we looked up the word willingness, and it's so powerful. It says willingness is a state of the mind that allows the human to believe, to decide, and to act. Step one allows us to believe. Step two, to decide. Step three, and to act. The rest of the steps, the action steps. So as it happened, you know, my idea was to go back to the state hospital. You see, because this is the only solution that I possibly knew at that time. See, I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. I had never, see, it was different in those times. There wasn't a lot of media on like today we talk about on the TV and things, and literature talks about alcoholism. But in those days, Alcoholics Anonymous was so anonymous you couldn't find it. See, I had never heard about it in my neighborhood. I had never heard of an alcoholic doing anything but drinking and dying. I had never heard it was possible for a person to be a recovered alcoholic. So, you know, I didn't know anything about help but the state hospital. So I remember I had $2.50, and I called a cab and went to the state hospital. I remember that morning on June 10th. It was sort of a foggy morning. And, you know, I remember going into the hospital, and it was different than, you know, going to a treatment center or someplace like that now. Going to the old state hospital, they treat you kind of strange. Nobody says anything to you. They don't have nothing to do with you. See, what's going on in there is a different society in there. There's a lot of people in there mentally sick, right? And so when you go in there, they divide up in there. There was about 4 alcoholics and about 75 crazy people. I mean, real crazy people. One guy had been in there, he was 36, had been in there since he was 6 years old. These people were put in there and forgotten. You know, what happens is they would put alcoholics, all of us together. So what they did, all the alcoholics would kind of get off and they would cling together. They didn't stay for 30 days and they would get out. The other mental people had been there for years. So when you ask one of them guys, one of them nuts, what he was in there for, they say, "Oh, I'm an alcoholic." They wanted to be an alcoholic because we were the class of the ward. It's the only place I've been where alcoholism was a status symbol. Of course, when you asked one of them alcoholics what he was, he said nervous breakdown, so you couldn't tell who was who. But they would watch you to see which group you belonged in, because everybody said they were alcoholics. I didn't say I went in there. I told them I was for drinking, and not for drinking. You know how we say it. So nobody talked to me. It was on a Saturday morning, and I went in, and Sunday, and Monday. A little friendly little guy on the ward. I thank God for him in my life. His name was Van, a sweet little guy, a little alcoholic on the ward. he had been in the ward about 10 days, and he had been to one or maybe two AA meetings, and he had the big book, and he had a carton of Camel cigarettes. I was broke, had 50 cents when I got there, and they give me some of this roll your own tobacco. Never rolled a cigarette in my life, right? They give me some paper and some roll your own tobacco. I wanted to smoke, and I was trying to roll this thing, and it'd fall down in my lap, burn up and everything. It was a mess. And this guy God's got him there with a big book and a whole carton of Ready Roll. I didn't have any trouble talking about my life being unmanageable. The only way I could smoke was take my tobacco paper, give it to one of them nuts, and let him roll it and lick it and give it back to me. Now, you ain't operating too well. And this guy's got a whole carton of Camels. So I would smoke his cigarettes, and he would talk to me about the big book, which he knew nothing about. Finally, I realized over the years he didn't talk to me about the big book. He talked to me about 3 men from Alcoholics Anonymous. And thank God, you know, these 3 men were there. And these 3 men were living the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, not talking it. Or didn't know nothing about the program, but he knew something about these guys. It was enhanced with these people, like I became later on. These 3 men from Alcoholics Anonymous. During those 2 years, some things had taken place. When I was at the hospital before, there was a great little lady who's a great part of my life today. That she was a young black lady. She was a social worker on the black ward. She was a great she had interest in people, the one that really had in. And she was working on the ward one day, and she hadn't been there too long, and she said they said they had a scholarship for somebody from that hospital to go to the Yale School of Alcoholism Studies. She said, I had no interest at all in alcoholism. She said, but I needed a trip. I needed a trip. So she went to the Yale School of Alcoholism Studies. There was a lot of alcoholics there at that time, and they took her to some AA meetings. She's a non-alcoholic, and she said, I was fascinated with these people. She said, I had never met anybody like those recovered alcoholics, and I enjoyed those meetings. And she said, when I get back to Little Rock, I think I'll find if they're there and start a meeting on my ward. So she had started this meeting 3 months before I got there. So I found Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember going to my first AA meeting, and I left the back wards at Old Hospital, I think it was March 14th, 1962. Because the little guy had been nice to me, giving me his cigarettes. And he also told me these 3 guys from Alcoholics Anonymous would bring 3 packs of cigarettes and lay on the table, which they did. And they would bring out a pot of hot coffee. And I left the back wards at the old hospital 35 years ago for a cigarette and a cup of coffee. And God gave me a wonderful life. I have a way of living that I never knew existed. And all I wanted was a cup of coffee and a cigarette. We talk about the grace of God, a gift unwarranted. You know, I met Alcoholics Anonymous and these 3 men. One of the guys' name was Charles, one guy was Neil, and one guy's Bill. Bill is still living. Charles became my sponsor, and he was there that night. And he did like we all do, and I hope I could do it. I doubt if I'd ever be able to. He talked about himself. He didn't talk, everybody else had been talking about my drinking. Here was the first guy I heard talk about his drinking. And he talked about what he had been through. You know, I had some problems. You know, alcoholics are. I had problems. Charles had got into some trouble when he was 14 years old. He had been put in a boys' school, and he got out when he was about 18 years old. And then he got in some trouble that he went to prison in Nebraska. He got out of that trouble, he just 2 stints in the Texas joint, right? And then he did some federal time. Then he ended up in the Arkansas penitentiary. He was a 5-time loser. And he was 38 years old. He woke up one day in the Arkansas prison. He had been out 6 years from the time he was 14 years old. And he said one day he came in from the fields. And he had been working in the fields, and he said he could work because he was used to working in prison. And he said it rained that day, and they came in, and he said some idiot had to put a book on his bed called The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. Some idiot, he said, left this book on his bed. He said, in the prison you read anything, even a Bible if you have to, or your shirt collar. And he said, I read that book, and he said, I found a formula in that book by which I could change my life and get out of penitentiary. I doubt if I could have done that. And he said, I took it and I applied it in my life. We were talking about it last night, an attitudinal change, a personality change, a spiritual experience, or whatever we call it, sufficient to recover. Charles had that in the penitentiary. You know, and when you have that in the penitentiary, you know, everybody can see it, even in the penitentiary. The people that were responsible for the penitentiary saw Charles. They saw his life change, they saw his attitude change, and they gave him a job in their office. And he finally ended up as a school teacher in the prison, teaching other people how to read and write. And he became active in helping people, and in about 3 years he was paroled. And he had 105 years against him when he was paroled. And he was 10 years out of the penitentiary helping alcoholics when he walked into the hospital and found me locked up. And I didn't have no problem after I met Charles. I didn't mention my little problems. You know, this man was a special thing in my life. And thank God I had him as a sponsor in my life for 31 years. You know, when the meeting was over, Charles talked about himself. I went over and I said, Charles, I hear what happened to you. I'm really impressed with what your life was about. I said, but what do you think I should do? Boy, that's what the book says. Let him ask you. He really suckered me in. And he looked down at me with a big smile and he said, fella, I was telling you what I did. He said, frankly, I don't give a damn what you do. Man, that really struck me. He said, I don't give a damn what you do. But then he looked at me and I had a great big smile. And he said, let me tell you something. He said, but if you want me to show you what I did, I'll show you, but I don't play. And that's where we started. This man did some things that nobody else has ever done for me in my life. I remember the experience of, I got out of the hospital. I didn't knock down the doors of AA. I did like most alcoholics that get out, you know, when they get out of these kind of places, they get busy. You know, we got a lot of business to take care of. I didn't go back to the meetings. The meetings were right there in town, and I didn't go back to the meetings. Oral wrote me a letter on June the 12th, 1962. I'd been out of the hospital for about 2 months, and he said he was coming back to Little Rock to the AA meeting. I'd been living, he lived 90 miles away, and I was right there in town. You know how we alcoholics are. I didn't have no transportation. That's the only thing we can go to here to California drunk and can't go get across town sober. But anyway, I went back to the meeting that night because Ora, and this is what maybe sometime this is what Ora played in my life. He took me to my AA, and then he carried me back to AA that night, because this is where the magic of AA began that night. You know, Ora was wrote me this letter, and it was a little folded up piece of paper that's written on. I still have it. I framed it, and it says, "Joe, I don't have time to write you. I'm coming to the AA meeting at the hospital Wednesday night. I will see you there." Very positive. So I went to the hospital that night, and you know, back to the meeting, the little meeting there at the hospital. And it was there that night the magic of AA began to take place. And our book talks about the magic of these rooms, right? What is it? What is it? What is it? My book explains it so much. It tells it right on the first page of there is the solution. You know, we are average Americans coming from all sections of this country, many different occupations, many different religions and political backgrounds. That's what's in this room this morning. We're all different. We're different. We're people who normally should not mix. You know, we should have never known each other. We're so different. But there exists among us a friendliness and fellowship that he talks about is indescribably wonderful. That's what I found that night in that meeting after I went back. And I went home, and Lou Bell asked me, well, what sort of thing, what is it? What do they do? I said, they don't do nothing. I said, they drink a lot of coffee, they smoke a lot of cigarettes, but it sure makes you feel good. I believe I'll go back next week. And I think that's what the fellowship is all about. Right? Wonderful stuff. That's what binds us. But the real thing is that would have not held us as we're now held. The thing that really binds us is that we have the same common solution. The vital spiritual experience as a result of these steps through working in the program. And you know, in those days, you know, it was a lot different today. And we're talking about the young people today. And things are always different. They get tired of hearing this. But in those days, you worked the program. Right? When I come in Alcoholics Anonymous in Little Rock in 1962, they didn't have but two groups. And in these two groups, everybody knew everybody else. Everybody knew everybody. Nowadays, we don't know whether they knew or not. They could come from over here and that. We don't know who's new. But they knew you was new because they knew everybody. And when you went in the door, they told you what you had to do. Right? And when we went in, the tradition in Little Rock was to work the first 30 days, work the steps. So we began to work the steps. And this was in 1962, and you know, it wasn't too far removed from 1957. You know, that stuff was, everything was still, things were still pretty boiling in the Little Rock area. And I was the first black in AA in Little Rock in 1962. And this wasn't the best time to be the first black doing anything in Little Rock. It was a community. It was, you know, AA, with people there were AA or not, it's part of the community. And it was community. It was a community problem. Right? And I think that's why I love Charles so much. That Charles took me to AA. Right? Charles's AA was threatened by me, but he worked with me. And that's a big thing to do. That's a big gift to give. But Charles was uniquely chosen to be placed in my life. Because you might not understand now, but when Charles came out of prison in the 50s as a convict and went to AA, he was treated exactly like I was treated. He had had this experience. Now, I was told I could come to the meetings, but I had to leave soon the meeting was over. I couldn't visit. Right? And sometimes, you know, when they first told me I couldn't drink no coffee, right? But that didn't really make me no difference. Because I was no different from any other alcoholic who makes this program. There's not but one thing you need to make it, and that's a desire to stop drinking. That's the willingness, right? And if you got the desire to stop drinking, if you got the willingness, you can overcome anything else that's there in front of your recovery. So we began to apply the steps in my life. Now, I didn't have any trouble with the first step. Like I say, I was glad to see why I was powerless. And they explained to me the allergy and obsession I could see I could see in depth why I was powerless. And they talked to me about, you know, this step 2. I didn't like that part about being insane, and they explained it to me very good, clearly. You know, it was embarrassing, but you know, I found out later on. I was don't tell this story very often. It's still painful. But I was still in the hospital. I was a little nut in the hospital. These people are worse. You know, you're locked up with about 75 of them. They're like flies. You know, you can't, you know, you couldn't get away because you're all locked up in the same big old part of the building. And they worried the hell out of it. And so I was staffed and I was going home, and they got around the ward that I was going home. And one morning, one day after coming in from lunch, one little nuts was staring over. He said, "Hey, Joe." I said, "What in the hell you want?" You know. And he kept on, he said, "I need to talk, come here." And finally, you know, I just worried me, so I went over where he was, and he did like that. He had a bench over there, wanted me to sit down. So I sat on the bench. I said, "Man, what do you want?" He said, "Joe," now he'd been there 12 years watching alcoholics. He said, "Joe, you're going home tomorrow, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "Joe, when you go home, if you don't drink, you won't have to come back here." Now, this was a crazy man. Now, he might have been insane about a lot of other things, but he knew the truth about alcohol. See, I wasn't as crazy as he was, but I couldn't see the truth about alcohol. When it came to alcohol, I was insane. So, you know, they settled me. Basically, the steps did for me. Mainly, one of the most powerful things it did is show me what my problem was. The rest of it was fundamental. And once I saw my problem, step 2 showed me what my solution was. A power greater than myself. And if you're powerless and the solution is the power, then the main job is, how do you find this power? And these other action steps laid out a simple program of action that I was to take, and I was to find this power, and I was involved in this every day, every morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock. I met my sponsor there 6 days a week. We worked the steps. I remember going through this. Today, it's amazing that this is the single most important event in my life. Little did I know it when I was experiencing it. But nothing has affected my lifestyle greater than a time with this recovery experience. And I remember after about 5 or 6 weeks one day standing at work, doing all this stuff, and spending all this time with Charles. And I remember some of the promises took place in my life. I was standing at work, of all places. It was a day like every other day, and I had been busy. It was on a Friday, and I walked over in the dining room that was closed. We used at night. I was a waiter then. And I remember the sun coming through the windows and the white tablecloths on the tables, and I had served lunch, so I was busy, and I was relaxing. I had a glass of water. I was standing there drinking a glass of water, and a thought came to me. What is this? And the only thing I think was everything seems is all right with me. It was the first time I could comprehend the word serenity, and I knew a new peace. And I began to realize what serenity was and what they were talking about. And to comprehend serenity, you have to experience it. And I know that this has happened as a result of these steps. You know, and I said, if I can hold on to this, I will never have to take another drink. You know, and I began to do the things that I was told to do. I began to work with other alcoholics. Like I say, I was the only black in AA at that time. And this was a place where we met every morning, and it was a place where new people came to the program. And we had some guys staying there. It was sort of the forerunner of a treatment center. It opened in 1953. We call it the dormitory. Men stayed there and went through the program. But they had an outside sponsor like I did. But I wasn't allowed to stay there, but I was allowed to go there. So I began to work with people. I began to work with the guys that were there. And I would go down to a meeting every Wednesday night and every morning. And I did this for about 4 or 5 years. And one morning, while I was down there, the guy said something about they was going to the county penal forum. And I had been sober about 6 months. And they said, Joe, there's some black guys down there. You need to go down there and see if you can talk to some of them. And so I went with them one morning, and we had a meeting. And the next Sunday I didn't go, and I saw the guys again, and they said, well, what happened? You didn't come back. I said, well, I can't come every Sunday. I was just coming out to help. And so the next Sunday, I hadn't seen those guys that week, and so the next Sunday I said, I wonder, am I supposed to go, or are they going? I didn't know. So I said, well, maybe I better go just in case they don't go. So I went, and they didn't show up, right? It was very peculiar. They never did come back. I went every Sunday for about 10 years. I got stuck with that. It was a great experience of my life, right? It was a great learning process of the people that I worked with in my recovery. You know, I began to work around that old institution, and then after a while, you know, I did so much work. After about 5 years, I was put on the board of directors. That's a very peculiar thing, that I was on the board of directors of the place they wouldn't let me stay. But it talks about the miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, in 1969, and when the money was appropriated to alcoholism across the country, we set up ad hoc committees to form these commissions and things, and each state had to do that. And I had, by that time, 8 or 9 years, been around and exposed enough to be elected as one of the people to set up the first alcohol and drug treatment programs in Arkansas. I began to be active for alcoholics. I think maybe this, it was something special. We set up the first commissions, and I was appointed by every governor from that time up until through Clinton to work on these commissions. I served on them for about 12, 15 years. I was chairman of the authority for the state for about 4 years. They governed all the programs in the state of Arkansas, and when I sobered up, I couldn't go in one. This talks about the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. It allows us to do many things and go many places that we've never been able to do. I could go on and on and on of the many things that has happened to me as the direct results of this program. After 8 years in recovery and working with people, these programs were set up, and I began to, they had a project in Little Rock. I was very reluctant. My life was Alcoholics Anonymous and working with people. I was very reluctant, and even those of us in AA didn't know what these things were. We didn't know what treatment was. We didn't know about these things at that time, and we were very afraid of them and reluctant to get involved, and I didn't want to get involved. And I asked everybody in AA, and some told me yeah, and some told me no. Should I get involved in this? And I remember I finally went to Lou Bell. God bless her. She's so simple and naive. And I asked her, I said, what do you think I should do? And she looked at me and she said, Joe, you do what is right. And I knew what I had to do. I didn't want to do it, but I had to do it because it was right. So I became involved in the treatment field in 1971. And it's been quite a trip with alcoholics. We started the Serenity House, which is now Serenity Park in Little Rock. I've been in business 25 years, last September, for alcoholics. We've treated over 16,000 people. I realize today why I'm an alcoholic. I realize today why I recovered from alcoholism. And thank God, God has given me a special blessing. Many people don't have that opportunity that I have had. See, I have found a purpose for my life. I think that God created all of us for a purpose. He created all of us for something. He didn't create us for nothing. And I think the happiest we're going to ever be in our lives, for me, I can say, is when we find out who we are, why we're on the face of this earth, and what we are supposed to be doing. I thank God this morning that I have reached that point why I know why I'm here. And I hope that while you're here, you will find the same things that I have found. Thank you, and God bless you.
I'm going to give it to Joe. He knows what it is. I'm trying to figure out what it is. On behalf of the host committee, Joe, thank you for coming. Thank you for allowing me to meet you.